The Elden Ring wasn't the world's foundation. It was a leash. The Greater Will didn't build order in the lands between. It sent a golden star carrying a living beast, and meteor fell from that same sky as its first messenger. That beast became the god everyone later called divine, and its death still hasn't stopped one demigod's body from rotting across an entire kingdom. Today I'm breaking down all 8 major events that shaped the lands between and how each one tightened the same broken system. Starting with the arrival nobody in this world was ever meant to witness. Greater Will. Picture your entire legal system arriving overnight, folded inside a meteor, with something alive still breathing inside the wreckage. That's roughly what happened to the lands between, except the arrival became part of the sacred origin story of the Elden Ring, and the thing inside it became associated with the order that shaped the lands between. The ancient incantation Elden Stars lays it out plainly. The Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which the game says would later become the Elden Ring, though the wording leaves the exact referent ambiguous. One straightforward reading treats it as a literal event. The Elden Stars account describes it as arriving with a golden star and beast, not as a crown forged by an early king, a living creature, riding a star, landing somewhere in what would later be called the Lands Between, long before anyone built a throne to sit near it. Shadow of the Erdtree adds a second arrival to that same cosmic delivery schedule. Meter, Mother of Fingers, came from the cosmos too, described as a shooting star that fell on this land. She seems to have worked as an early relay between the Greater Will and its fingers, passing instructions down from somewhere well outside the world. That relay got damaged along the way, which raises an obvious question. If the voice giving orders to an entire civilization was already garbled at the source, how much of what followed was ever really the plan? And the Elden Beast, the beast associated with that original star, is described as the living incarnation of order itself, the force associated with the Elden Ring. The packet does not establish the later consequences of that system, but the story's central stakes begin to take shape with the moment a star lands. The arrival establishes the Elden Ring's origin story, and the Elden Beast is described as the living incarnation of order. The evidence available here gives no confirmed date for these arrival events, and this evidence does not establish whether Meteor fell before or after the Elden Beast arrived. Historians just call it the arrival of the Greater Will and move on. The packet provides no more specific established name for it, and it does not establish why no more specific label is used. The account begins with a creature that the Greater Will sent into the lands between on a golden star, and the next struggle will decide which fundamental law that creature's order can actually contain. Destined death. Some people in the lands between cannot die properly, and the Golden Order's removal of destined death changed how death worked. Death itself used to be part of the order of the world, a rune sitting inside the Elden Ring like any other law of the cosmos. Queen Marika pulled it out, not destroyed it, removed it, which is a very different verb once you sit with it, because a law that gets deleted from a system does not stop existing. It just stops applying to everyone equally. Before the removal, the power moved through a woman history barely bothers to name properly, the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who commanded the Godskin Apostles. The Apostles, once said to serve destined death, wielded the god-slaying Black Flame, a force that kills the body without destroying the soul. Malekith fought her and won, though the exact order of her defeat and destined death's sealing is not established here. And fan arguments continue about where that fight lands in Marika's rise. He took what was left of destined death and locked it inside his own blade, and in doing so, he stopped being a soldier and became a vault with legs. Here's what that vault actually cost the world once it closed. Ordinary people lost access to a complete death, living instead under a system where life would not truly end, and souls could return to the Erdtree. The Godskin's fire was tied to a world whose rules of death had changed once destined death was pulled from circulation. The rune didn't vanish. It got promoted to a controlled substance, rationed out through one guardian instead of loose in the world. That was a deliberate arrangement. The rune was removed and placed under one guardian's control. Ground that abstraction in one family. Godwyn's death reads as tragic once you understand what happened to him. His soul perished, but his body did not, while the rune of death was under a guardian's control. A piece of that guarded power got out, and Godwyn suffered an unusual death in which his soul perished while his body did not. It has already leaked once. The fragment used during the Night of the Black Knives came directly out of Malekith's supposedly perfect custody, which tells you everything about how secure one guy holding the apocalypse actually is. There's a thin theory floating around that ties the gloam-eyed queen's eye imagery to Melina herself, and it's compelling precisely because of that shared imagery, but the available evidence does not confirm that connection, so treat it as pattern, not record. What's confirmed is simpler and worse. The arrangement made Malekith the sole guardian of destined death, and that custody did not prove perfect. That locked law changed how life and death worked under the Erdtree's order, but the rules governing death are not the only subject of this section. War against giants. Marika won a war against a god of fire, and when that fire would not die, cursed the last fire giant to tend it. The fate of that flame is the part this section is here to examine. You beat an enemy whose flame was capable of burning down the Erdtree, and the smart move, the obvious move, is to snuff it out and salt the ground. Marika didn't do that. The sword monuments up on the mountaintops of the giants record the basics plainly. Queen Marika and her consort Godfrey, already first Elden Lord by this point, marched their armies against the mountain giants in the early years of Erdtree rule, with a smithing stone said to have been used to hone the champion's weapons at the birth of the Erdtree. The giants weren't some feral tribe waiting to be farmed for lore flavor. They had their own faith, their own god in the Fell God, and their own sacred power, the Flame of Ruin, a fire capable of burning the Erdtree, the tree at the center of this new order. You'd think a fire like that gets extinguished the moment the war is over. Instead, once the mountain giants were beaten, the Flame of Ruin was sealed, and guardians were appointed to watch over it, keeping it burning rather than destroying it. That's a strange call for a woman who, one section back, already showed she'd rather trap a force under law than let it disappear. Sealing death itself was an earlier move. Marika removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring and sealed it away when she established the Golden Order. Caging her enemy's holy fire, centuries before anyone would need it, is the same instinct wearing a bigger crown, a flame that could eventually be used to burn the Erdtree. Someone had to hold the leash. That job fell to the last mountain giant left standing, cursed to spend eternity as the Forge's jailer, forced to protect the exact flame his people had fought to defend. Picture that. The other fire giants are gone, and your punishment is to guard the flame your people fought to defend. Godwyn's murdered soul is the wound at the center of this whole order. This giant is what containment looks like when it's handed to the loser instead of the family. Read it as border security, and it's a defensive war that got lucky. Read it as Marika containing a rival sacred power. The Fell God's faith faded from prominence, while its destructive flame remained contained rather than destroyed. The evidence for that imperial reading is solid, even though the evidence here does not identify the exact order Marika gave when the flame was sealed. A conquered frontier is easier to hold after its defenders have been defeated. It gets a lot messier when the next rival isn't a mountain tribe at all, but a whole kingdom with its own throne and scholars. In the Liurnian Wars, Radagon led the Erdtree's army, then left Rennala and returned to the Erdtree capital to become Marika's second husband. Liurnian Wars. Liurnia faced two Liurnian Wars, and the Second War's monument records no victory for the Golden nor for the Moon. Liurnia still ended up folded straight into the family that fought it. The paperwork survives on a sword, and the sword records a war that ended in a marriage. There's no single Golden Order playbook for handling resistance on record. Liurnia instead faced military campaigns followed by a marriage alliance. Twice, Liurnia's glintstone sorcery stood opposed to the Golden Order, so the Erdtree turned to force against the lake. The First Liurnian War has one line of memorial for its ending. Radagon's glory burns red as his hair. That is a champion, not a conqueror. The record celebrates Radagon's role in the First Liurnian War, but these excerpts do not settle the region's full outcome. So they tried again. The Second Liurnian War's monument is almost insulting in how flatly it refuses either side a win, in contrast to the First War, whose ending stays unrecorded here. No victory for the Golden, nor for the Moon. Twice the Erdtree turned to force against Liurnia's sorcery, and neither fight is documented as a decisive win for the Golden Order. Here is the part that should bother you more than it usually does. Rather than accept a stalemate as failure, the Erdtree found a use for it. Radagon, its own champion, married Rennala, the enemy queen, and the war ended in reconciliation, not on a battlefield, but in a household. The queen married into the one she was fighting, and the academy was drawn into the reconciliation. You'd assume that's the story, a tidy diplomatic ending, two traditions shaking hands over a ceremony. But Radon, Ricard, and Rani were children of that union, and their parents' marriage joined the Erdtree and Moon houses, leaving each child heir to that combined political legacy. The record gives Radagon a title, Champion of the Golden Order, and a second wife waiting in Lendl. But the excerpts provided here do not give a date for when he decided Renala's purpose was served. Follow the pattern anyway. A general who annexes a rival's bloodline has simply moved the battlefield from the lake to the nursery. Think about what that means for a family tree joining two houses with a history of conflict. The Erd tree absorbed Liurnia the way you'd absorb a business partner you couldn't beat in court, and it planted that rivalry directly inside 3 future demigods. The Second War's monument records no victory for either side, while the excerpts do not settle the First War's full battlefield outcome. The compromise creates a royal family carrying 2 incompatible inheritances, and their children later carried the consequences of that union into the wider history of the lands between. Night of Black Knives. Black Knives. One night, Godwyn dies, and other demigods fall too. But Ranni's role is the clearest part of the plot. Godwyn the Golden loses his soul in the fog. Ranni loses her body on purpose and calls it an escape. The same weapon carves 2 completely different outcomes out of the same royal bloodline. 2 incomplete deaths split between body and soul. This was more than a demigod assassination. It produced a death split between body and soul. The official version treats this as a straightforward political murder. The golden heir cut down by masked killers in the dark. Ranni blows that apart herself. She admits, flatly, that she stole the fragment that made the whole night possible, a fragment of destined death pulled out from under Malekith, the Force tasked with guarding it. Forge that fragment into a blade and you stop killing bodies. You start killing the thing underneath them. You're not supposed to clock this part right away. Godwyn's soul was destroyed that night, but his body remained, corrupted and overgrown afterward. Ranni went the other direction entirely. She let her own flesh get discarded in the ritual and survived as a spirit, cut loose from the Empyrean flesh she wanted to abandon. One demigod left with a body and no soul. One demigod left with a soul and no body. Divided like somebody measured it, with a ruler. That division has a name. The curse mark of death, the half-wheel wound of the centipede, appears in 2 matching halves. One tied to Godwyn, the other to the flesh Ranni threw away. This wasn't presented as a random murder. It was a ritual that split the effects of death between body and soul. So who swung the knives? Women, by their own armor's account, rumored to be Numen, rumored to sit close to the queen herself. Close enough that you have to ask the question, even while the answer stays thin. The evidence here does not confirm that Marika gave that order. Assassins rumored to have close ties to Marika herself raise questions about why the Golden Heir was targeted, but the answer stays thin. Ranni claimed responsibility for the plot, while the exact division of labor between her, the assassins, and anyone else pulling strings that night has never been fully spelled out. What's certain is what the ritual produced. Ranni's plot left her without her Empyrean flesh, while Godwyn's soul was destroyed and his body remained. Godwyn's body is out there right now, still spreading, still nowhere near finished dying. Alright, I guess that counts as a successful assassination in the most cursed technical sense imaginable. A perfectly divided death exposes a deeper fracture at the heart of power, where destruction and repair can come from the same hand. Shattering of Elden Ring. One god swung a hammer to shatter the Elden Ring, and the same body later swung it again in an attempt to save it. That is not a metaphor. Queen Marika and Radagon share one divine flesh split across 2 names, and after the Night of the Black Knives, Marika took her hammer to the Elden Ring itself and broke it. The Elden Ring, a divine source of the Golden Order, was shattered in Marika's hands. Radagon answered. As the reigning Elden Lord, he picked up the same hammer his other self had just used to commit the crime, and he tried to hammer the ring back into shape. He failed. Whatever force held that shard together before, it would not go back together after, and Radagon remained in the heart of the Erd Tree, with powerful figures, including many of her children, holding the remnants. Think about what that actually means. The destroyer and the repairman were the same person, moving through the same hands, working against each other in a single divine body. This rebellion began with the queen's own action, not an army outside the palace. This one began with the queen herself shattering the ring, or splitting herself in 2, depending on which half of her you're asking. Godwyn's death came before this in the timeline, and the available evidence gives no interval in days or months between them. A mother's son had his soul killed while his body kept walking the earth. and after his death, that same mother put a hammer through the Elden Ring. Nothing in the evidence here explicitly identifies grief over Godwyn as Marika's motive. It doesn't have to. The order of events does the talking. Fans have spent years arguing over what actually drove her. Grief for Godwyn, a rejection of the Golden Order she herself built, a contested theory that she meant to expose the Greater Will's whole system from the inside, a private war with Radagon over who actually controlled the ring. Several theories have been proposed, but the evidence available here does not establish a single confirmed motive, which tells you the real answer is probably a fracture running straight through a god who was never fully one person to begin with. Marika and Radagon ended up imprisoned together, sealed inside the Erd Tree after the shattering. But the ring's shattered remnants were distributed among powerful figures, including many of Marika's children. A broken throne is still a throne. It just has pieces now, and pieces can be picked up. That's the inheritance her children walked into. Divine authority broken down into shards small enough to hold, each one carrying a piece of a fight the ruling family never actually resolved. Once power was divided among many hands, rival claimants to the throne began competing over who should become Elden Lord, shattering war. After the Elden Ring was shattered, Marika's offspring claimed its shards, and their newfound strength triggered the Shattering, a war that left the lands between in ruin. Nobody's plan was simple enough to call a reunion, and the fighting that followed left the throne exactly where it started, empty. That's the joke sitting underneath every campaign of the Shattering. Marika's demigod children inherited fragments of the broken Elden Ring, scattered across a continent that used to answer to a single throne, and the great rune-wielding demigods went to war over power. The official account says the demigods claimed the shards, and the power tainted them as a great war left the lands between in ruin, even while Liurnia remained neutral. What follows is one way to read the Shattering, a series of campaigns and ruins stacked on top of each other, while the man holding the center together carries the cruelest irony of all. Morgott defended Lendel against assault after assault during the Shattering, while the Golden Order that he was bleeding to protect had already condemned him at birth for the same omen curse it hunted in the streets below the capital. He hid his own body to guard a religion that would have thrown him into the sewers with the rest of his kind. He defended the capital, but preserving it was never the same as claiming it. Rykard chose a different failure. He turned his back on the Golden Order, dragged his followers toward Mitgelmir, and made Volcano Manor a symbol of rebellion, a hunting ground where his own operatives stalked the Erdtree's champions, though the record never says why. A rejection of the Golden Order pointed straight at the thing it came from. Then there's Aeonia, the campaign where Malenia and Radahn fought to a standstill in the Caelid Wilds. Two of the lands between's most formidable demigod fighters met and broke each other permanently instead of settling anything. Malenia bloomed into the Scarlet Aeonia and flooded the region with rot. Radahn's mind rotted along with the land he was standing on, and Malenia herself dropped into a recovery that swallowed years. What was Caelid supposed to be before that fight? The surviving record doesn't tell us. The surviving material here doesn't provide a full order of battle for any of this. The record survives in fragments. A sword monument here, a piece of armor there, and historians reconstruct the sequence the same way archaeologists piece together a shipwreck. The cautious conclusion supported here is that the war left the lands between in ruin, and no lord arose from a Leyndell that stayed defended, contested, and guarded by the one heir the whole system had already disowned. The demigods spend their inheritance and leave the future unclaimed. A vacant throne changes the question from which dynasty deserves the crown to who is even still around to answer when it calls. Return of the Tarnished. The Elden Lord throne becomes the prize in a succession struggle that started the moment the Elden Ring shattered, and one contender for it is somebody the lands between already threw out once. That is not an accident of casting. Godfrey and his warband were stripped of grace and left the lands between during the Long March after his last foe fell, becoming the Tarnished. And that old expulsion is part of the history behind the Tarnished's return. You are not a chosen hero arriving at the perfect moment. You are recycled material in the Order's eyes, sent away as outsiders, but kept in reserve and called back after the old order had begun to fail. Think about what had to fail before that recall happened. Godwyn died an incomplete death that left his body walking through the world, while whatever made him a person was already gone. The Elden Ring was later shattered into great runes scattered across the demigods who inherited it, and the exact link between those two events remains contested. The great rune bearers were demigods with powerful bloodlines and competing claims to the Broken Order, and they responded to that inheritance with warfare, corruption, and desperate attempts to hold on to power. None of the Tarnished had yet ascended to the Elden Throne. Zero out of countless who tried before you. So Grace, the same signal that once wrote Godfrey off as unworthy, starts calling across the fog for the exiles it discarded, exile after exile, until enough of them wash up to matter. You arrive as a tarnished of no renown, and the game's own framing says so outright. The round table hold fills up with tarnished pursuing their own paths, while the two fingers point you toward the Elden Ring, presenting the whole errand as service to the Greater Will's original design. Whether that design still means what the fingers claim is a live argument, and it is not a small one. Meter's account of how communication with the Greater Will actually works casts real doubt on whether the fingers are still relaying anything true. For much of the journey, you follow a chain of command that runs from Grace, through the two fingers, to the Greater Will, and the packet does not establish that this chain accurately represents the Greater Will's instructions. So, you spend the whole game following orders that might be forwarding a will nobody has actually heard from in ages. Grace does not favor every returning exile equally either. Some tarnished lose their guidance outright, others burn out mid-journey, calling shots that go nowhere. The pattern fits a signal choosing among the discarded, rather than reviving all of them the same, though the evidence here does not establish a formal selection process, and that gap is worth sitting with rather than papering over. The demigods had everything: armies, blood, the source itself sitting in their hands, and no shortage of chances to use it. They still couldn't bridge broken order into new order. You arrived with a stranger's name, and you are the one left standing at the door when the fog finally clears. On the ending where you repair the Elden Ring, the lands between places its next age in the hands of the outsider, its old order cast away. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.